Christmas Eve is supposed to be a night of warmth, mercy, and second chances, but for one shy young woman, it became the coldest night of her life. While families gathered around glowing trees and offices emptied early for holiday celebrations, she sat silently across from an HR representative, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on the edge of the table, as she was told she no longer had a job. No warning, no gratitude, no compassion. Just a signature line slid across the desk, and the quiet instruction to turn in her badge before leaving. She didn't argue, she didn't cry. She simply nodded, stood up, and walked out into the winter night carrying a cardboard box and a future that suddenly felt terrifyingly uncertain. What no one in that room realized, what no one could have imagined, was that firing her on Christmas Eve would soon become the most catastrophic mistake the company had ever made. Welcome back to Swift Tale, the channel where untold stories, hidden truths, and quiet courage come to light. And if this is your first time here, let me ask you, have you liked, shared, and subscribed yet? Because the story you're about to hear isn't just about corporate failure or a shocking boardroom revelation. It's about the dangerous cost of underestimating quiet people, the kind who don't speak up in meetings, don't demand credit, and don't fight back when they're wronged, but who silently carry entire systems on their shoulders. This is the story of a shy girl no one noticed, in a company obsessed with performance metrics and loud personalities. It's the story of a termination that felt routine, almost forgettable, until the CEO discovered something buried deep in the company's internal systems that would leave the board speechless, careers in ruins, and reputations shattered. What he found forced an uncomfortable truth into the open. The company hadn't just fired an employee, they had unknowingly removed the very foundation keeping everything from collapsing. And this story matters now more than ever. In a world that rewards visibility over value and confidence over competence, countless talented people are overlooked simply because they are quiet. Their work goes unseen, their sacrifices unnoticed, and their voices unheard until they're gone. Tonight's story challenges the way we define success, leadership, and strength. It asks an important question: how many brilliant people have been dismissed simply because they didn't know how to be loud? As we begin this journey, remember, sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones no one is watching. She sat at the far corner of the open plan office, where the fluorescent lights hummed softly and conversations rarely drifted. Most people walked past her desk without a second glance, registering her presence only as a name on a seating chart or an email signature at the bottom of long threads. She was the kind of employee companies often forget, soft-spoken, reserved, and almost invisible among louder personalities. While others filled meetings with confident voices and rehearsed opinions, she listened, taking notes with meticulous care, absorbing details most people overlooked. Silence for her was not weakness. It was a space where she observed, learned, and worked. From the beginning, she struggled to stand out in a workplace that rewarded volume over value. Raised to believe that hard work spoke for itself, she never learned how to advocate loudly for her contributions. She avoided conflict, dreaded presentations, and shrank from attention, her heart pounding whenever she was unexpectedly asked to speak. Yet behind her quiet demeanor was an exceptional mind, methodical, analytical, and deeply committed to doing things right. She double-checked numbers, tested systems late into the night, and fixed problems before they ever reached management's radar. When something broke, she stayed late to repair it. When others rushed, she slowed down and caught mistakes that could have cost the company millions. Her job title barely hinted at her true responsibilities. Officially, she was just another mid-level employee, replaceable, forgettable, easy to cut when budgets tightened. Unofficially, she was a silent guardian of the company's most fragile systems. Over time, colleagues began relying on her without realizing it. They forwarded problems to her inbox without meetings or praise. When a report failed, when a server hiccuped, when data didn't add up, her name quietly appeared in internal chats. "Can you check this?" She always did, and she always fixed it. Despite her reliability, she remained unseen. Performance reviews praised her consistency, but criticized her lack of initiative and leadership presence. Promotions went to those who spoke confidently, even when their ideas were flawed. Managers mistook her silence for disengagement, her humility for incompetence. She smiled politely when credit went elsewhere, telling herself that stability mattered more than recognition. She believed that as long as the work was done, everything would be fine. Workplaces built on appearances rarely notice what truly keeps them standing. While the company grew louder and more aggressive in its pursuit of profit, she remained steady, unnoticed, and undervalued, quietly holding together systems no one else fully understood. And as Christmas approached, with office lights glowing warmly and end-of-year pressure mounting, no one realized that removing the shy girl from the corner desk would soon unravel everything they thought was secure. Company prided itself on being modern, efficient, and relentlessly data-driven. Glass walls, motivational slogans, and quarterly growth charts filled every hallway, projecting an image of success that impressed investors and intimidated employees. Everything was measured: output, visibility, attendance, and impact. But impact, as leadership defined it, was loud. It was the ability to dominate meetings, present bold ideas, and speak with unwavering confidence, even when certainty was thin. Those who fit this mold rose quickly. Those who didn't were quietly pushed to the margins. Meetings became performances rather than problem-solving sessions. Executives spoke in polished buzzwords, managers competed for attention, and decisions were often made by whoever sounded the most convincing in the room. Behind the scenes, cracks formed, systems strained under rapid expansion, processes were patched together hastily, and critical infrastructure became fragile. Yet on the surface, everything looked perfect. Quarterly numbers were celebrated, bonuses were distributed, and warnings were dismissed as negativity. There was no room for caution in a culture addicted to momentum. Human cost rarely entered the conversation. Employees were categorized as assets or liabilities, headcounts on spreadsheets rather than people with lives beyond their desks. As the holiday season approached, leadership focused obsessively on end-of-year metrics. Budgets were tightened, redundancies were discussed, and departments were instructed to trim the fat. Christmas decorations appeared in the lobby, but compassion never made it into the boardroom. Decisions were made quickly, cleanly, and without empathy, especially for those who didn't command attention. The CEO, distant but respected, trusted reports more than people. He believed efficiency required detachment, that leadership meant letting numbers speak. He rarely walked the floors or spoke to quieter employees, relying instead on filtered summaries delivered by ambitious managers. In that vacuum, perception replaced reality. Shyness became synonymous with low value, and silence was interpreted as absence. No one questioned whether the company's success depended on people who never spoke up. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the decision had already been made. A name had been highlighted on a list, justified by performance metrics that failed to capture her true contribution. From the board's perspective, it was logical, necessary, almost invisible. What they didn't realize was that their obsession with numbers had blinded them to the most important metric of all, the human one. And in removing the shy girl from their system, they unknowingly set the stage for a reckoning that would shake the very foundation of the company. Her manager had always been busy, at least that was the impression he gave. He moved quickly through the office, phone pressed to his ear, coffee perpetually in hand, projecting the image of someone indispensable. In meetings, he spoke confidently, often louder than necessary, and rarely paused to listen. To him, leadership meant visibility, control, and constant motion. Anyone who didn't mirror that energy faded into the background, and the shy girl, sitting quietly at her desk, was the easiest to overlook. He never asked how she worked, only whether she spoke. In performance check-ins, he focused on presentation rather than substance, advising her to be more proactive and make herself known without ever asking what she was actually doing day after day. When she tried to explain her work, her words came softly, hesitantly, and he quickly lost interest. Silence, to him, meant a lack of ambition. He assumed that if her contributions were truly valuable, they would be obvious, loud enough to demand attention. Behind his assumptions, however, he leaned heavily on her reliability. When deadlines approached or systems malfunctioned, he forwarded problems her way without hesitation. He trusted that she would fix things quietly and efficiently, and she always did. But trust without acknowledgement is a dangerous thing. Over time, he stopped seeing her as a contributor and began seeing her as a convenience, someone who would always clean up messes without complaint. Her consistency became invisible. Her silence became justification. When budget discussions began, her name surfaced quickly. She didn't lead meetings. She didn't manage people. She didn't push back. On paper, she looked expendable. Her manager barely hesitated when asked to justify the cut. He cited a lack of leadership presence, minimal visibility, and the need to streamline the team. He never reviewed her actual output in detail. He never checked which systems she maintained or how often others relied on her work. The decision was easy because he had never truly looked at her in the first place. And so, with a few confident sentences and unchecked assumptions, he sealed her fate. On Christmas Eve, he walked past her desk without stopping, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge that his casual dismissal of her value would soon expose not only his failure as a manager, but the fragility of the entire organization. Sometimes, the greatest damage isn't caused by cruelty, but by indifference. And his indifference was about to cost the company more than anyone could have imagined. Christmas Eve arrived quietly, wrapped in soft snowfall and the illusion of kindness. The office was half empty, desks decorated with tinsel and blinking lights, laughter echoing faintly from a small group gathered near the break room. People were checking watches, eager to leave early, their minds already drifting toward family dinners and wrapped presents. At the far end of the floor, the shy girl sat at her desk, finishing one last task, unaware that the day would end not with relief, but with devastation. The email arrived just before noon, short, formal, and chillingly vague. Please come to conference room B at 12:15. No explanation, no context. Her stomach tightened as she stood, smoothing her sweater with trembling hands. She told herself it was nothing, maybe paperwork, maybe a routine check-in. But the hallway felt longer than usual, the office sounds muted, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Inside the conference room, the lights were harsh and unforgiving. An HR representative sat stiffly at the table, a folder neatly aligned in front of her. Her manager stood by the window, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. No small talk followed, no preamble. The words came out rehearsed, emotionless. We've decided to move in a different direction. The phrase echoed in her mind as a termination letter slid across the table. Christmas Eve, effective immediately. She didn't cry, she didn't raise her voice. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up the paper, eyes scanning words that blurred together. Years of quiet loyalty reduced to a few sterile paragraphs. No acknowledgement of overtime, no recognition of responsibility, just a polite apology and instructions for returning company property. She nodded, whispered, "Okay," and stood when told the meeting was over. It lasted less than 7 minutes. As she walked back to her desk, conversations resumed around her, unaware that her world had just collapsed. She packed her belongings into a cardboard box, photos, a mug she barely used, a notebook filled with handwritten solutions no one had ever seen. One by one, she shut down systems she had protected for years, following protocol without protest. No farewell, no questions. When she turned in her badge at the security desk, the guard wished her a Merry Christmas out of habit. She managed a small, broken smile before stepping outside into the cold afternoon air. Behind her, the office doors closed softly, sealing what everyone believed was a routine decision. But in that quiet moment, on Christmas Eve, under falling snow, the company unknowingly crossed a line it would soon regret. Because as the shy girl disappeared into the crowd, carrying her box and her silence, something vital left with her, and the consequences were already beginning to unfold. What no one in the office realized as she walked out that afternoon was how deeply her work was woven into the company's daily survival. Her contributions didn't live in presentation slides or executive summaries. They existed in the unseen layers of systems that simply worked because she made them work. Over the years, she had become the silent custodian of processes others barely understood, stepping in whenever something failed, broke, or behaved unpredictably. She never documented everything she fixed, not because it wasn't important, but because she believed it was her responsibility, not an achievement to be showcased. Long after the office lights dimmed, she often stayed behind, untangling issues no one else had the patience to solve. She patched vulnerabilities before they became disasters, reconciled mismatched data, and corrected errors that would have embarrassed entire departments if they had reached clients. When systems went down late at night or on weekends, she logged in remotely without complaint, quietly restoring order before anyone noticed the chaos brewing beneath the surface. By morning, everything appeared normal, smooth, efficient, and stable. Stability, ironically, became the reason no one questioned her absence. Colleagues relied on her instinctively, even if they didn't fully recognize it. They forwarded problems her way with vague messages like, "Can you take a look?" and trusted that whatever was wrong would be fixed by the time they checked again. Her inbox was filled with unresolved issues that never escalated because she resolved them first. Over time, the company grew dependent on her calm precision, mistaking reliability for replaceability. Because nothing ever exploded, leadership assumed nothing was at risk. Even her manager didn't know the full extent of her involvement. Reports passed upwards stripped of her fingerprints, filtered through layers of delegation until her role disappeared entirely. She didn't insist on credit. She didn't push her name forward. She believed that doing her job well was enough. In a culture obsessed with visibility, her humility became camouflage, hiding just how essential she truly was. And so, when she was fired, nothing immediately broke. No alarms sounded. No red flags appeared on dashboards. The office carried on, blissfully unaware that the invisible safety net had been removed. But systems held together by quiet dedication don't fail instantly. They unravel slowly, subtly, and then all at once. And somewhere deep within the company's infrastructure, the first threads were already beginning to fray. The CEO rarely worked during the holidays, but this Christmas felt different. With most of the company on break, the silence gave him space to review year-end reports without interruption. Late on Christmas night, sitting alone in his home office, he scrolled through performance dashboards, verifying final numbers before the board's January meeting. At first, everything appeared normal, profits up, costs trimmed, projections optimistic. But then he noticed something subtle. A recurring system tag appeared across several critical reports, an identifier he didn't recognize, embedded quietly in the background of multiple departments. Curious, he drilled deeper. The tag appeared in data recovery logs, financial reconciliation files, and internal risk alerts, places that only surfaced when something almost went wrong. The timestamps were strange too, clustered late at night, early mornings, weekends. Whoever was behind this activity wasn't scheduled for those hours. They weren't part of any leadership initiative, yet their presence was everywhere, silently preventing issues from escalating. The CEO felt a flicker of unease. Systems didn't stabilize themselves. Someone had been intervening. As he traced the entries backward, one name began to appear with increasing frequency, the same name over and over again, tucked into footnotes and automated logs. A name he barely recognized. A name that hadn't appeared in a single board presentation all year. He paused, frowning, and opened the HR database to learn more. What he saw made his stomach tighten. The employee tied to these logs had been terminated on Christmas Eve. At first, he assumed there was a mistake. Perhaps the name belonged to a former contractor or an outdated account, but the access records told a different story. These interventions were recent, critical, precise, and ongoing right up until the moment she left the building. Entire departments were operating smoothly because someone had been quietly correcting failures before they surfaced, and that someone was now gone. For the first time in years, the CEO felt genuine uncertainty. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen, realizing he might be looking at the outline of a disaster that hadn't happened yet, only because a single, overlooked employee had been holding it at bay. The decision to fire her suddenly felt reckless, uninformed, and dangerously final. And as the snow continued to fall outside his window, the CEO understood something unsettling. The company may have just cut loose the one person who truly understood how fragile its success had become. By the next morning, the CEO could no longer ignore the knot forming in his chest. What had started as a passing curiosity now felt like a warning he had been dangerously close to missing. Before the holiday break had fully ended, he authorized a discreet internal audit, small, controlled, and off the official record. He didn't want panic. He wanted clarity. A handful of trusted analysts were asked to review system dependencies, financial safeguards, and risk mitigation logs from the past 2 years. What they found unsettled even the most seasoned among them. As the audit unfolded, a pattern emerged with alarming consistency. The same employee, The shy girl fired on Christmas Eve appeared again and again at critical intervention points. She had overridden faulty updates, corrected miscalculations before reports were finalized, and restored corrupted data hours before it would have triggered regulatory alerts. In several cases, her actions had quietly prevented losses in the millions. None of this had been escalated, not because it wasn't important, but because she had resolved the issues before they reached crisis level. To the system, everything appeared normal. To leadership, nothing had gone wrong. The deeper the analysts looked, the more disturbing the picture became. Departments that seemed independent were, in fact, interconnected through fragile processes she alone maintained. Shortcuts taken by ambitious managers had been masked by her corrections. Incompetence had been hidden by her competence. Risk had been neutralized not by strategy, but by one person's relentless attention to detail. The company hadn't been stable, it had been quietly rescued over and over again without realizing it. By the third day, the CEO ordered the scope expanded. What began as a small review became a comprehensive audit. Emails were pulled, logs were cross-referenced, emergency fixes traced, and with every new discovery, the implications grew darker. Removing her hadn't just eliminated a safety net, it had exposed the company to cascading failures waiting to happen. Systems were already showing early signs of stress, minor errors slipping through where none had before. When the preliminary findings were presented, the room fell silent. Senior executives exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence shaken. This wasn't a minor oversight. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of how the company functioned, and at the center of it all was a quiet employee no one had thought worth keeping. The CEO closed the report slowly, realizing that the decision made on Christmas Eve had set something irreversible in motion. The real cost of that mistake was only beginning to reveal itself. By the time the audit reached its final phase, there was no longer any doubt, only shock. The shy girl's role in the company was no longer a theory or an anomaly buried in logs. It was undeniable fact, laid bare in timestamps, recovery reports, and financial safeguards that stretched back years. What leadership had believed was a well-oiled, self-sustaining machine was, in reality, a structure constantly on the brink of failure, held together by one person's quiet vigilance. The analysts mapped out her interventions on a timeline, and the picture was staggering. Every major success the company celebrated over the past 2 years coincided with unseen crises she had intercepted, data breaches neutralized before detection, compliance errors corrected before audits, system outages repaired hours before client exposure. Entire product launches would have failed without her silent corrections. Profits that executives proudly cited in meetings existed only because she had prevented losses no one ever knew were possible. Even more unsettling was how alone she had been in doing this work. Documentation showed that she often acted without backup, relying on her own understanding of systems few others fully grasped. She anticipated problems before they occurred, built workarounds on the fly, and left subtle markers in the system for herself, breadcrumbs only she knew how to follow. She wasn't just maintaining operations, she was engineering resilience in real time. And she did it without recognition, authority, or protection. As the truth settled in, the board's confidence dissolved into disbelief. Faces that once projected certainty now reflected unease and embarrassment. How could someone so critical go unnoticed? The answer was painfully clear. The company had equated silence with insignificance. They had confused humility with incompetence. In chasing visible leadership, they had ignored actual leadership, the kind that prevents disaster rather than reacting to it. The CEO sat quietly at the head of the table, absorbing the implications. This wasn't just a bad termination, it was a systemic failure of values and perception. The board had approved a decision that jeopardized the entire organization, all because they failed to recognize the power of a quiet contributor. And as systems continued to show early signs of strain, one realization became impossible to ignore. Firing her wasn't just a mistake. It was a warning, one that arrived too late, carrying consequences no apology could easily undo. As the CEO confronted the board with the shocking revelations, the weight of the Christmas Eve termination became painfully clear. Decisions made in haste, based on assumptions and superficial metrics, had nearly brought the company to its knees. The quiet girl they had dismissed, unassuming, overlooked, and underestimated, had been the invisible backbone of the entire operation. In that moment, the board realized the cost of arrogance and the danger of equating visibility with value. Leadership, they understood, was not always loud. True influence often comes quietly in diligence, foresight, and integrity. Her story is more than a corporate cautionary tale. It is a reminder that human potential cannot be measured by appearances or volume. Many talented, hardworking people go unnoticed every day simply because they do not seek the spotlight. The shy, diligent, and humble individuals in our lives, whether in offices, schools, or communities, may carry responsibilities and possess abilities far beyond what we perceive. Overlooking them can lead to failure, missed opportunities, and sometimes catastrophic consequences. After the shocking revelations, the office was silent in a way it had never been before. Managers whispered in corners, interns peeked nervously at the conference room doors, and even the CEO felt a creeping sense of guilt that refused to fade. The realization that they had fired someone so vital, someone who had quietly held the company together, sent waves of panic through the upper floors. Immediate efforts were made to locate her, but it was not as simple as sending an email or a message. She had already left the building, her presence replaced only by the void she had once filled. Calls were made to her home, messages sent to personal contacts, and colleagues who had interacted with her tried to track her down. Each attempt yielded only silence or vague leads. The shy girl had always maintained boundaries, keeping her personal life private and her work self-contained. No one knew where she might have gone after walking out that Christmas Eve, and the board began to understand the depth of their oversight. They had not just dismissed an employee, they had dismissed someone who carried untold layers of responsibility beyond their comprehension. In hallways and meeting rooms, the mood shifted from shock to introspection. Executives who had prided themselves on decision-making realized how blind they had been, trusting superficial metrics and appearances over substance and reliability. Emails, reports, and logs were now scrutinized with a new awareness, but nothing could replace the person who had quietly solved problems for years. The company suddenly understood that stability was not granted by policy or protocol. It had been nurtured meticulously and invisibly by her diligence. And while the search continued, so did the creeping realization of potential consequences. Systems began to show small cracks, minor errors slipping through where she had once corrected them preemptively. Nothing catastrophic had happened yet, but leadership knew it was only a matter of time. Panic mingled with regret as they recognized a truth that could no longer be ignored. The shy girl's absence was not just a loss, it was a warning that every unchecked assumption, every undervalued contributor, carried real consequences. Christmas night had never felt so heavy. Outside, the city sparkled with holiday lights, but for her, the world seemed colder than the winter wind that cut through the streets. She walked alone, carrying a box of personal belongings and a quiet dignity that had become her armor over the years. At home, the apartment she had returned to felt both familiar and alien, empty, silent, and untouched by the chaos of the corporate world she had left behind. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe, to feel the weight of what had happened, and to confront the flood of emotions she had kept contained during the firing. The initial days were the hardest. Her pride battled with despair, and doubt crept in like an uninvited shadow. She questioned her abilities, her worth, and the choices that had led her to this point. But the same meticulous, resilient nature that had allowed her to quietly hold a company together began to guide her now in a different arena, her own life. She reviewed her skills, her accomplishments, and the ways in which she had quietly made a difference. Slowly, a sense of clarity began to emerge. She was not defined by the recognition she had been denied, nor by the mistakes of those who failed to see her value. As days turned into weeks, she began to rebuild. She updated her portfolio, reached out to trusted mentors, and explored opportunities that aligned not just with her skills, but with her sense of purpose. She reflected on what she had endured and recognized a strength that was often overlooked, her ability to adapt, to persist, and to continue despite setbacks. In her solitude, she found empowerment, a quiet, steadfast belief that she could thrive even outside the confines of an organization that had underestimated her. The world outside her apartment had continued without pause, but she no longer felt invisible. Each small accomplishment, each problem she solved independently, reminded her that her worth was not contingent on approval from those who had failed to recognize it. Christmas, once a symbol of heartbreak and isolation, became a turning point, a moment that marked the end of one chapter and the deliberate beginning of another. And though the company had lost sight of her, she had never lost sight of herself, nor the silent courage that had always guided her steps. Back at the office, the boardroom had become a place of tension and unease. Reports, emails, and system logs had revealed the magnitude of their mistake, and no one could ignore it. The same executives who had once celebrated quarterly successes now sat in silence, realizing that the company's stability had rested on the quiet diligence of someone they had dismissed. Each revelation felt like a blow, not just to their pride, but to their understanding of what leadership truly meant. They had assumed control meant authority, visibility, and decisiveness, yet they had failed to recognize competence when it was silent, methodical, and invisible. The CEO convened an emergency meeting, facing a board that was unaccustomed to discomfort or accountability. The conversation was raw and unfiltered, exposing how assumptions, biases, and superficial metrics had guided decisions rather than real understanding. Executives had to confront the uncomfortable truth. The shy girl they had fired on Christmas Eve was the backbone of the very systems they relied on. Policies were questioned, managerial practices scrutinized, and long-held notions of performance were challenged. For the first time, many realized that leadership involved listening, observing, and valuing substance over presentation, a lesson learned at an enormous cost. Action followed quickly as the company tried to mitigate the risks left in her absence. IT teams worked overtime to address vulnerabilities she had once managed seamlessly. Departments were restructured, redundancies reviewed, and accountability protocols implemented. The board understood that they could not undo the past, but they could ensure that such oversight would never happen again. Their reckoning was both practical and symbolic, a demonstration that the company would value competence, diligence, and the quiet contributors who kept the organization alive. Yet the emotional impact lingered. Humility replaced confidence, regret replaced pride, and the board learned a lesson that numbers alone could never teach. They had fired someone indispensable and had almost paid the ultimate price, not financially, but in trust, morale, and the credibility of their leadership. Her absence was a constant reminder that talent is not always loud, and that true leadership involves recognizing and protecting the people who keep everything running, even when no one is watching. The company's reckoning was painful, but it was necessary, and it laid the foundation for meaningful change, one built on respect, insight, and a recognition of quiet, enduring strength. The story of the shy girl fired on Christmas Eve became more than a cautionary tale. It became a lesson in the kind of power that often goes unnoticed. True strength is not always loud or dramatic. It is measured in diligence, foresight, and the steady competence that prevents crises before they occur. The board and executives, who had once equated visibility with value, now understood that leadership is not about who speaks the loudest in a room. It is about who ensures the machine continues to run smoothly, often without recognition or applause. In this sense, the shy girl embodied a form of power far more enduring and transformative than any executive title could confer. Her story challenged the company and viewers to rethink how success is recognized. Quiet competence, humility, and integrity are not weaknesses. They are vital forces that sustain organizations, communities, and relationships. It reminded everyone that underestimating someone based on personality, demeanor, or style can have far-reaching consequences. The lessons extended beyond corporate walls. In families, schools, and social circles, those who work silently, who help without expectation, and who shoulder responsibilities unseen are the true pillars that hold everything together. For the audience of Swift Tale, her journey offers both warning and inspiration. It encourages us to pay attention, to notice those who quietly excel, and to honor the invisible contributions around us. It challenges us to cultivate humility in our own leadership, to value substance over appearance, and to recognize that sometimes the most influential people are the ones who do not demand attention. And above all, it offers a powerful reminder that courage and competence are not always paired with confidence or assertiveness. They often reside in those who quietly persevere, even when no one is watching. Her story leaves an enduring message: never underestimate the quiet ones. Their strength is real, their impact profound, and their absence can reveal just how much we rely on those who work behind the scenes. In a world obsessed with visibility, her example teaches us that true power often whispers rather than shouts, and that recognizing it can transform not only organizations but lives. As the snow settled outside the city, the office lights dimmed, and the year drew to a close, the story of the shy girl fired on Christmas Eve left an indelible mark on everyone who had underestimated her. The company had survived the immediate crisis, but the lesson lingered. Brilliance is not always loud, heroism is not always visible, and leadership is not always about titles or recognition. What mattered most was substance, the quiet competence that kept everything running when no one was looking, and the resilience to persevere even when the world seemed indifferent. Her absence had shown just how fragile the illusion of control had been, and how much reliance had been placed on a single, silent pillar of strength. For viewers of Swift Tale, this story resonates far beyond the walls of a corporate office. It is a reminder to honor the quiet contributors in our lives, to see the value in diligence and humility, and to challenge assumptions that equate visibility with worth. The shy girl's journey demonstrates that courage, perseverance, and competence can shape outcomes in ways that are often invisible until they are no longer there. Her story teaches us to pay attention, to listen, and to act with appreciation before it's too late. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of someone in your life whose work goes unseen, now is the time to take action. Like this video, share it with others, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below. Tell us what part of her story resonated most with you, or share your experiences recognizing quiet strength in your own life. Your engagement ensures that stories like hers are not forgotten, and that lessons in humility, courage, and perseverance continue to inspire. Ultimately, the legacy of the shy girl fired on Christmas Eve is timeless. The people we overlook may be the very ones holding everything together, and recognizing their value is not just kind, it is essential. Let her story be a call to awareness, respect, and action. Look closer, value substance over style, and never underestimate the quiet ones, because sometimes their strength is what saves everything, and we only realize it when it's almost too late.